All right, now we're going to move on to conformity and obedience. These are fascinating things to study. I would very much recommend looking up videos about both the Milgram study and the Zimbardo prison study. Just love lecturing on both of those things. I might do a lecture on those for those who want more info on them, but for now I just want to make sure the terms are straight. So the main difference between conformity and obedience has to do with, is there an authority figure? If it has something to do with an authority figure, that's when we label it obedience. Now, it doesn't have to be real authority. This can be perceived authority, and we'll get to that later. But conformity then is when you adjust your behavior to go along with the group, but there's really not any authority figure that's telling you you have to do that. It's more of, I'm doing it because I feel almost like a public pressure to do it, right? So I, as your instructor, if I tell you, here's how you need to do this assignment, okay? That's not conformity because I'm an authority figure, I'm in charge of your grade, I'm telling you here's how you need to do. That's obedience, right? If you see that all of your classmates are doing the assignment in a particular way, like the final project, right? Like if everyone's making a creative video and you see that's how everyone else is doing it, that's not part of the instructions, but that's how everyone else is doing it. Mine's gonna look weird if I don't do mine that way too. That would be more conformity. There's no authority figure telling you to do it. You're doing it because that's what everybody else in the group is doing. The study one of the original studies about this is so incredibly funny. Basically what they did is the researcher's name was Solomon Ash. He was a professor, and people were out of the room, and there was the one target, and he said, okay, I'm gonna draw these lines on the board. No matter how long I draw them, the correct answer is always 2. No matter what I draw, you need to say 2. The correct answer is 2, right? And so what he would do is draw one line and then draw 3 more lines, and one of those lines would be the same length as the original line. Okay. Now, he did it a couple times, and okay, the correct answer is 2, and we would make it 2, and so, okay. What was interesting was when he did this, and the correct answer was not 2, right? So like, I draw my line, and then maybe I draw 1 being identical, and then 2, I draw like this, and then 3, I draw kind of in the middle. And we're going around the room, and the person who was the target was never the first to speak. They were always last, right? So we're going around the room. Okay, which line is the closest to the original line? And number 2's down here, right? And number 1's like this. And we're going around the room, and everyone's saying 2, 2, 2. Well, it gets to the poor person who's the target, and they're sitting here thinking, okay, I have either lost my mind, or I've misunderstood the instructions. But either way, everyone else has already said 2. So, gets to that person, well, I guess it's 2. They conformed. Even though mentally you can clearly see these 2 lines are not the same length, I mean, that's what everybody else said. And so they said 2. Now, it wasn't all of them. The averages in his studies is it ended up being just over about a third of students conformed. But that's still a huge number. That's more than you would expect for something that obvious. So what we learned about conformity, so again, like a good just baseline definition for conformity, is that you are adjusting your behavior to blend in or coincide with a group without the specific influence of an authority figure, right? Because the professor didn't say everyone needs to say 2. It was just they were trying to blend in. Now, through other research, we've found that there are a few things that tend to increase the tendency for somebody to conform. And you might think of an example of a time you've conformed to blend in with a group and kind of think about how much of these are true. The first thing that tends to increase the tendency to conform is if something is making us feel incompetent or insecure. I don't think I'm as smart as the rest of these people. I don't feel like I'm as accomplished as the rest of these people. I don't feel like I'm one of the more attractive people here. If there's something about the group dynamic that is making you feel incompetent or insecure, you're more likely to conform with that group. Also, numbers matter. if there's 3 or more people, conformity tends to increase. Because if there's just 2 other people, it tends to be easier for you to disagree. But when you get to that number of 3 or higher, we see conformity increase. But there's kind of a happy medium there of it not getting to be too huge, because it still needs to be small enough that you have a sense that other people are paying attention to you. If you're just kind of blending in with the crowd and no one's noticing you, it tends to be less likely that you are going to conform, right? If I have a room of 100 people and I tell everybody to write down on a piece of paper their opinion about whatever, okay, and there's 100 people, you're sitting here writing, well, no one's looking at me, no one's paying attention, no one's going to look over at what I'm writing. I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to conform. I'm going to write what I want. But let's say it's a group of 5 people and you're all sitting around this little round table and everyone can see everyone else's paper, and it's obvious that everyone's kind of looking, well, what are you saying about them? Well, what are you saying about them? You would be more likely to conform, especially if there's conversation going on and you know everyone else is saying the same thing and people are paying attention to you and what you're writing. So there's kind of a happy medium there of conformity increases if there's at least 3 other people, but conformity also increases if the group is done in a way where you have a sense that people are paying attention to you and you're not just blending in with the crowd. It's also most likely if there's a group where everyone else agrees, because once somebody has started that chain of disagreement or that chain of breaking the conformity, the magic's kind of broken, right? So it's most likely if everyone else agrees and you're kind of the odd one out. It's more likely if there's things about the group that you personally admire. Because if you don't like those people, if it's something you're just kind of stuck in of, I don't like these people, I don't want to be like these people, why am I going to pretend my idea is different, or why am I going to conform, I don't even like them, versus if it is a group that you admire, that you want to belong to, that you want them to respect you. And then finally, if you have not previously stated your ideas that are the target of the conformity. Because if you've already said how you feel in the past, there could be that confounding element of, I don't want to seem wishy-washy, I don't want to seem fake, I can't backtrack on this. But if I've never told them how I feel before, I could kind of conform and blend in and no one will ever know. So those are things that increase conformity. So then again, obedience is kind of the same idea of, I'm changing my behaviors or I'm doing something I wouldn't normally do, but I'm doing it because I'm going along with a sense of authority. And this is the famous example of this is the Milgram study, where you had the professor, researcher who were bringing people in and they were instructed to give electrical shocks to a participant behind a wall. The participant wasn't actually getting the electric shocks, but they didn't know that. And as they would get the questions wrong, the researcher was like, no, you need to shock them, you need to shock them, this is part of the study, you need to shock them. And they were obeying and going along, even when the person behind the wall was like screaming and crying in pain and begging them to stop and asking for help, which again, it was all fake, they didn't know. But it's this idea that because there was this authority figure here, or somebody they perceived as being an authority figure, they were willing to go along with it. Now, the reason I say perceived authority is when they were debriefing the participants and they were talking about it afterwards, one thing that caused a little bit of emotional distress in the participants was, why was I even perceiving you as being in a sense of authority? You're not my professor. I don't work for you. I don't work for this institution. You have no ability. I even said there that I knew I could leave anytime I wanted if I was uncomfortable with this study. You can't actually punish me. You can't actually do anything that impacts my life. You have no meaningful relationship with me. I just met you 10 minutes ago. Why did I perceive that you had enough authority that I needed to continue to sit here and obey as you were telling me to shock this person in the other room that I don't know? So there is this idea of, it doesn't even have to be a true authority. It just has to be a sense of authority. So kind of to piggyback off of this, obedience is highest when the person who's telling you what to do is somebody that is perceived as an authority and is in close physical proximity to you, right? Because if you tell me to do something that I don't want to go along with, and I don't perceive you as an authority, of no, screw you, I'm leaving, I don't care. There has to be that element of perceived authority. That is a cornerstone of obedience. We've also found that obedience is increased when I don't just perceive you as an authority, I perceive that there's some sort of institution that I respect that has the back of this authority, right? So, like, my authority as your instructor is perceptually increased because I have the backing of the college, right? It's not just me, I have the support of the college. So that makes my authority bigger. You see this a lot when you look at, if you ever watch any of those documentaries like about churches gone wrong, right? About pastors that or ministers that went on just absolute power trips and got away with crazy things. Part of why they were able to keep people under their obedience as they got more and more extreme was that perception of it's not just this pastor, it's this bigger religious institution that I respect that has their back. And then the idea that they're kind of like the same thing we talked about with conformity, that there has not yet been a model of defiance. That once somebody starts defying and we see them being successful, that obedience becomes less likely. And this is something we could also talk about in developmental psychology with children obeying their parents, right? That if they have an older sibling that they see continually defying with no consequences, that increases the likelihood that the younger child will also defy because they've seen that modeled. And then if this obedience is going to be something that involves a victim, and your book gives some very difficult to read examples from the Holocaust, but if this obedience is something that involves a victim, the likelihood for obedience is higher if there has been something that's happened that has some way depersonalized that victim, devalued that victim, or if they're at a distance and you can't physically see them. So, conformity versus obedience. Conformity, there's not an authority figure involved, it's purely like a social thing. Obedience, there is at least a perceived sense of authority, even if it's not a real authority, but there's something that's perceived about the authority that's telling you what to do, that you're going along with. Oh, I don't know that I said it, in case I didn't, the key word for this video is cat, like the animal, a cat. And next we'll talk about prejudice versus discrimination.